behind the gun. I'll make my final stand. Yeah, and that's why they call me bad company. I can't deny bad company till the day I die. Until the day I die. Until the day I die.
The following is the story of Lieutenant Colonel Rob Swertfager on the morning of 9/11/2001. Coming to work every day now has new meaning. When I kiss my kids goodbye in the morning, I realize that I'm going out to defend them. It sounds kind of corny, but it's the reality. As an air defense F-16 pilot, I've had to contemplate about the realization and ramifications of shooting down a civilian plane. This is something we are all trained to do, but it's not something we ever thought we might actually have to do. Up there in that small cockpit, I have had a lot of time to think about the seriousness of Homeland Defense. It was September 11th, 2001, a date scarred into the memory of every American. While most Americans remember standing at their TV watching as the horrifying attacks took place, there are some in our country who have a completely different experience and a story of their own. During the drive through the Fresno Air National Guard base on the morning of 9/11, I glanced around and I noticed many drivers around me happened to be crying or looked panicked. I switched on the radio and heard the terrible news that an airliner had flown into one of the World Trade Center buildings. Less than a minute later, a breaking report was saying that a second airliner had smashed into the other tower. I knew immediately that it was an attack on our country, and I sped my way to work. Shortly after arriving at work, I received news that there were possibly numerous hijacked airliners that were being used as weapons against us, the United States. Once we were informed about the attack, it was pretty cut and dry. It was now our job to defeat the attackers. We were absolutely terrified about what was happening in our country, but being professionals, we knew that our training and tactics would help prevent further attacks. I was directed to go out to my F-16 and strapped in while the aircraft was being loaded with live missiles and bullets. This is the first time it had ever happened to me. My flight lead and I were designated as the first jets to be scrambled if NORAD thought there was a threat on the West Coast. Unlike the rest of the population, we were not able to watch or listen to the morning unfold. I had to get updates from my crew chief, who told me that the Pentagon had been hit, and then ran up and said an airliner had gone into the field in Pennsylvania. It was a very surreal feeling being locked in our cockpit, wondering if the attack was only aimed at the East Coast. I would know shortly. Moments later, the klaxon screamed and we were scrambled by NORAD. Lieutenant Colonel Ron Manor and I roared out of Fresno towards an urgent intercept 100 miles off the coast of San Francisco. As we checked in with NORAD, they told us that a 747 had refused direct orders from the FAA to divert to Canada. Our mission was to intercept this aircraft and ensure that it was not a threat to our United States of America. I was focused on the task at hand, but in the back of my mind the entire time is the thought of, what if I have to shoot down a plane full of civilians, the very people that I'm sworn to protect? Flying at low altitude and well over the speed of sound, we arrived in San Francisco 9 minutes after takeoff. Unfortunately, the sonic boom we created shattered windows of several homes and businesses along the route of flight. As we passed San Francisco and headed west over the Pacific, we acquired the Thailand Air 747 on our radar, and moments later, we saw the aircraft heading towards the coast. As we rolled in behind him, we realized he wasn't heading for the airport, or SFO. He was heading straight for the city of San Francisco. Air traffic controllers and NORAD officers were jittery because of the events of the day, obviously, and now this airliner was refusing to direct orders to divert. We were all wondering if the airliner had legitimate reasons for presenting from diverting, or if this was the beginning of a West Coast attack. With Fresno F-16s off each wing, the airliner continued to refuse controllers' orders to turn away from San Francisco, fly south to parallel the coast and lower its landing gear. In other words, to show that he was not attacking. The 747 pilot claimed that he was critically short on fuel and didn't have enough fuel to divert to another location. As the aircraft inched closer and closer to the city, NORAD had to consider the option of shooting down the commercial airliner in order to protect the people of our country. They needed more information on that airliner, and they needed it now. We were directed to fly along the 747 and investigate the cockpit for anything unusual. I inched my fighter just 10 feet off the wing of the passenger plane while my flight lead positioned himself in trail in case we were directed to fire at the 747 if he wasn't friendly. As I peered into the Thailand Air 747 cockpit, I saw the crew looking at me with eyes larger than dinner plates. They were all in uniform and were definitely not terrorists. I immediately felt better about the situation and reported this to NORAD. Finally, after 20 minutes of uncertainty and adrenaline, the airliner turned south and the landing gear came down. We stayed alongside the airliner as he touched down on the San Francisco International runway and orbited above to make sure they didn't try to take off again. Only 15 minutes after we took off, 5-0, we were back in the ground in Fresno. Prior to the morning of 9/11, our unit had recently returned to Fresno from a 45-day deployment enforced in the no-fly zone in Iraq. We were shot at almost every sortie that we flew over Iraq, and of course it was very concerning. We had confidence when we were in combat overseas. It was mentally challenging and tense. But that 1 hour on September 11, 2001 was the most emotionally, physically, and mentally draining day I have ever had.